And it's welcome back to We Love Ugly Data, the Deep Analysis podcast. This is episode 29, if you can believe that. Well, if you sat through the previous 28, you'll very readily believe that. But if you're new, it's episode 29. Alan's back this month. Hi, Alan.
Hello. Sorry,
I see you yawning in the background there. You're bored already.
Binge watching TV last night, which was about.
Oh, I see. Fair enough. Well, look, we've got quite a lot to fit into this month's podcast. And you think, if there's a lot to fit in, we dispense with the fripperies of doing the format, but we cannot, because part of the format is talking about the format, and this is the format of the podcast. 3 topics, 30 minutes. We'll try to keep to 30 minutes. We've never actually managed it, but we'll try to keep 30 minutes to discuss it. But as I said, it's quite self-referential this month. It's very much a Deep Analysis podcast. It's primarily about things that Deep Analysis has written and published in the last few weeks, which is good. Because if we're going to do any promotion, it might as well be a promotion for our own work, right? So you will remember, if you were here last month, that Dan was on, and Dan and I went through a handful of the vendor research updates, the things that we call vendor vignettes that we shouldn't, but we still call them the vendor vignettes. Maybe the vendor profiles, I can't remember, but we went through 3 of those last month. There were too many to do in one episode. We published this. That's it. If you're a subscriber. Feel that value there. There's so much we couldn't go through it in one portion of the podcast. So we've got 3 more to go through, and 2 of them are written by Alan. So we can go through those this month. So let's get into those. If you want to read the profiles of all 6 of them, there's a blog post Alan wrote with introductions to them. And again, the links for this will be in the show notes. Links for everything will be in the show notes. And I think, looking at our publishing calendar, there's another batch going out later this month.
There's a whole bunch more. It's quite crazy. I mean, we just so people know, there is no plan. I wish there was. Yeah, they just come when they come. I mean, honestly, they we have briefings. Listen, we're not going to write up every briefing. That was just not worth it. And so we wait until something interesting comes along, frankly, right? And sometimes it's like buses, right? They all turn up at once. So yeah, we've got a bunch more coming.
So let's get into them. So Alan, the first one for you to talk about is Ignite. I think it's going to be quite difficult to talk about everything that Ignite does in a pithy way.
We definitely can't talk about everything Ignite does, but
no.
Let's give a bit of context here.
Yeah.
So Ignite, I mean, I've probably known Ignite pretty much from when they started up, right? Which is a long time ago. They dropped off the radar, frankly, and it was like, oh, are they still around? Was the question if their name came up. And anyway, things have changed. They've had new investment. They've got a new management team in there, and well done them, right? They've bounced right back. And truthfully, when I met with them, well, I've met with them a few times in this past year, but let's just say the first time I met with them in the last year or whatever, I was shocked how many customers they had, for one thing. Who knew that, right? I think, hope I'm not getting this wrong, but anyway, I know it's over 20,000.
Wow.
Which is pretty amazing. I mean, I'm sure many of them are small, but so what? That's a lot for any kind of enterprise software. It's a lot. And yeah, they are really interesting. I mean, they're an alternative, I guess, right, to Box or OneDrive or Dropbox or FileCloud or whatever. But what they've really done is, and I'll keep this short and sweet because we definitely can't cover everything here. A few things. They've got this really very, very neat technology, which you can read about in our report, for handling very large files, right? And so guess what? They've got a major following in engineering, architecture, and construction, who have very large files, right? Yeah. And it's clever what they do. And beyond that, they've just built this sort of super secure. They did sort of try and brand themselves as sort of some kind of security company at some point in the past, which wasn't a smart move. But at the end of the day, they're highly secure, highly, compliant with any kind of regulation, but just nice touches in there. I mean, it's a well thought out platform. And yeah, very impressed. So I'm glad they're back on the radar.
Cool. And if you are a subscriber and you want to get the full details of Ignite, of course, you can read the entire, I'm going to say vendor vignette, it's just easier, the full vendor vignette through your account on the Deep Analytics website, as you can with all of these. And also, if you are a subscriber, you will also be getting what we refer to as the crew, so the quarterly research update, which contains actually additional little vendor profiles, little ones from briefings and conversations as well. So there's a bunch of additional stuff you get with the crew. We'll come back to that another time as well. But the most recent version of that has just come out, which is why it's fresh in my mind. Next one is one I wrote about, which is Bardeen, which is kind of interesting. This was actually one that Dan found for me, actually, and said, I think you should talk to these people. So full credit for Dan. And the reason why Dan noticed them is they'd recently launched a product called Work Intelligence, which, of course, as people who write about work intelligence, we are immediately like, not in a litigious way, but kind of interesting what their thing for using that term was. And funnily enough, it turns out to be very task mining focused. So what's Bardeen? Well, it started off as a desktop automation platform. So you use a bunch of browser-based applications, and of course, browser-based applications these days include things like Microsoft 365, which even if you think you're using it in a desktop mode, you're actually using it as a browser wrapper, right? So there's a whole bunch of stuff that happens inside browsers. Bardeen allows individual users and groups of users and teams of users to set up everyday automations for the stuff they do. So like a lot of these companies, a big chunk of their user base is around sales and marketing. So people who are using LinkedIn and Salesloft and a whole bunch of, HubSpot, Salesforce, a whole bunch of desktop tools to build up automations to go away and, check what all their accounts are doing, or, all those kind of things. And what Bardeen had been doing previously was actually interviewing their prospective clients to talk about these workflows. And in the end, they decided to develop something which we would recognize as task mining, which was a client that sits on your desktop and actually works out what these automations are on an individual basis and across a team basis, and then says, hey, all these activities seem to be happening amongst your sales team. Shall we offer you an automation that allows you just to do those tasks every day? Gives insight to management teams about what everything, how these tasks are going and how often they're being performed. But it's kind of interesting because it was a company that did not start from a task mining direction, but ended up in task mining as a way of actually feeding an on-ramp to develop automation. And we kind of bang on about that's kind of an important route for task and for process mining as being an on-ramp for automation. So Bardeen, relatively small startup, but an interesting company to talk about. Next one, this is one of yours, Alan. So SER.
Yeah, SER. Well, another one who dropped off the radar for years.
Well, yes, indeed.
And it's funny because I very first report I ever published as an analyst, which was a book back in the day, a 300-page book, and they were in there. Anyway, so they've been around a long time. German-based company SER. They're an interesting one, to be honest with you. They have a very strong SAP story, which
I guess being a German company, they're likely.
Yeah, being a German company, you'd sort of expect that, but they've kept that under covers. And in fact, they seem to have kept a lot of things under covers. This is a pretty solid player. So the key product is called Doxis. And what's nice about it is, it's got some heritage. I mean, they know what they're doing. They've got a client base who've been using them for over 20 years, right? So there's that. But what we liked about them particularly is the sort of we call it a merging, but very unified sort of back and front end, right? It's sort of, on a lot of systems, you're jumping from here to there, you're going to the admin console, it's really nicely done. I mean, this is a pretty sleek system. And And yeah, it is a document management platform. It's an ECM platform. And, we do rail against, I'm using the word rail so many times today, but we do rail against people who say, oh, who cares about document management? Who cares about it? Well, a lot of people do, actually, because it's really important. And so SER, I think, we wanted to put a little bit of a spotlight on them because maybe they weren't getting the love they deserved, frankly. So yeah, it's a serious platform for ECM. It's very much a contender, very well-established organization. And I hope I'm not getting into racial stereotypes here, but very, very well engineered. This is solid stuff. So yeah, and just sort of summarizing those three, I mean, this is what we like to do, isn't it? Sort of find them, find the interesting ones. We don't write up everything. And they are a mix of like Bardeen, which is a relatively new and small startup, to more established companies like SER. The point is, we're not into here's your 5 leaders in a market of 300.
Yeah,
we're actually into, okay, so why is this one interesting? Why is that one? And confidentially, why isn't this one, right? We don't bother covering those ones. So hopefully, if you read the vendor vignettes, every single one of them is worth reading. And every single one of those companies is worth having a look at because they are doing something interesting. That's why we covered them.
Yeah, and up on screen for those people that can see it now is just a screenshot of those last 6 that we talked about across this podcast and the previous one. So SCR, Bardeen, and Ignite today, and with Dan last month in Third, Cambrian, and I talked a little bit about Evolute IQ. So it gives you an idea. We've got companies of various, from companies that established this decade to companies that have been around for multiple decades, across a range of related unstructured content management requirements, automation requirements. If you go to deepanalysis.net and have a look at the vendor vignettes, even if you're not a subscriber, you can have a little search through and you can look at the little pictures and a little description. So it gives you an idea of I think there's 3 figures worth of individual profiles in there. So it gives you an idea of kind of the breadth of what we're doing. And if you're thinking, well, we haven't spoken to you, please come and speak to us. If you want to, just tell us about what you're doing as your company. Everything from, seed and pre-seed through to decade-old companies. We are not necessarily interested in one over the other. We're interested in companies that are doing something interesting that relates to our particular specialist niche, right?
Yeah, 100%. And that's the sort of call out to any analyst relations people out there.
Yep.
Listen, we don't care what your revenues are. We don't care how many employees you have. We just literally don't. We don't care what geographies you're in. We care about what you're doing. And if you do, but here's the twist: you've got to be doing something interesting, right? Because there's an awful lot of companies out there who don't do anything. It's perfectly fine. It's a business, but it's pretty much the same as everybody else. So we like to say we're looking out for innovation, and we are. But we are really trying to spotlight, and you mentioned, we've got many more of them. Yeah, we do. We've got a huge library of them at this point. Yep. And I'd say it's pretty unique. I can't think any other analyst firm has a library like that.
Cool. Well, on to something, again, which again, very self-referential. So topic 2, AI agents, part 2. Obviously, we can't go through a podcast without talking about agents in some respect, but this is, again, something we've published. You will remember, because I banged on that about a few times, at the end of last year, beginning of this year, we published a analyst brief. I think actually came out, I think we finished the publication of it in December and put it out in January. An analyst brief, which is free to download from deepanalysis.net, which is called AI Agents. What are they, how they work, and where organizations might best use them. And it's been downloaded by literally lots of people. I can't remember the number, quite a lot of people. We thought, rather than waiting the whole year to actually update that with supplementary information, we would write a second part, which was published a couple of weeks ago. Again, also free to download. One doesn't replace the other. The second is very much an addendum to the first one. Second one, AI Agents Part 2, the evolution from single systems to complex process orchestration. Although automation is, of course, also applicable as a title here. So what's that about? Well, You remember when we talked about the first report, it was about how agents bring specificity to your use of generative AI. Or you can do things which are specific to the way in which your organization works. That was very much the theme of the first one. Where we are with this supplementary part here is we're adding to that specificity with your first look at AI agents. As they become more complex, we're now on to them beginning to actually execute entire processes potentially. So building on that specificity, I still can't say the damn word.
Tough word.
No, it's a tough word. I regret it. It's the right word. I just regret that I can't say it. If we build on top of that with the ability to do full execution, then agents become more interesting. And up on screen is a diagram. Trust me, this is the most complicated diagram, which is actually in the entire report, which shows things like Google's A2A, Anthropic's MCP. These are both very, very early. They're not standards, they are proposed protocols and nothing much more than that at this stage, that help build that potential execution on. In fact, they're so early. There was a story a couple of weeks ago about how one of the Anthropic MCP services was vulnerable to SQL injection, which is something that's been around for 25 years. So the idea of industrializing them and hardening these services and protocols for use in real world is still very early in its life cycle. But much like we had with the first report, the reason why we wanted to put this out here is not to be a detailed architecture of how you physically build systems. LinkedIn appears to be full of thousands of people who are experts in this. No. What this is here, much like the first report, is to give organizations who are being asked what's our agent strategy, or are our agents something we should be investing in 2025 or looking to plan for 2026, is to give them some basic information on how this stuff fits together, some of the use cases, some of the ways in which you can organize teams to investigate them, for argument's sake, and to provide you really with that sort of that initial trusted information on which to base those kind of projects. Alan?
Yeah, and I would say two things here. One, this is free to download. Now, I really would push everybody to download these two reports. They are very, very popular. Lots of people have been doing that, but everybody should do it, because my goodness me, what a load of codswallop is talked about agentic AI. That's a word I don't use very often, right? But it seems appropriate. I mean, it's just nonsensical. I mean, it's just driving me nuts. So here's two reports that actually explain to you what the heck they are, how they work, and they're great grounding. I mean, it's very similar to, if you're watching us on YouTube, the book that's behind me that Kashyap and I wrote, Practical Artificial Intelligence. The goal of that is very similar to this. It's like, this is what you need to know, right? It's not, this is how you code something. It's not, this is how you engineer something. It's, if you're going to be involved in discussions about AI in terms of the book, or agentic AI specifically, read these two and you're probably going to be the smartest person at the table.
So let's break that down a little bit further. As I said, the diagram we had on screen just now was very much the most complicated one in the report, and it was probably the most architecturally appropriate one in here. But let's break that down a little bit more. I wrote an introductory blog post to the report called "Friendship is Agentic," which is up on screen for people who are watching, and will be in the show notes for everybody who wants to get that. But really, we break down in this a kind of three-part set of agent needs. So for that execution, agents need context, they need connection, and they need friendship. And context is that, why are you asking me to do this thing? What does that mean in the broader context of how this organization works, and how I as an agent fit within that? So really, that's the kind of agent persona stuff. And if you're familiar with technologies like RAG was very much a way of getting context-related data into it. And actually, on that previous, I'm not going to go back to the diagram, that RAG still appears on that previous diagram. Connection, well, that connection is very much the connecting to other systems. So that's the kind of role that MCP and MCP's alternatives and descendants will come on to, which is, in order to actually execute these plans, I might need to go to other places to get information, and having a standard way of connecting to them is really important. And the final bit, friendship, which is, it is unrealistic to expect single agents to be able to work autonomously across a enormously broad range of things that we want. It's likely and appropriate that agents will want to talk to agents. Agents who's a specialist in HR might need to talk to an agent who's specialist in IT, but for argument's sake, as part of an employee onboarding process that you might need to automate. So having the ability to have agents talking to agents, friends talking to friends in peer groups is really important. So that's kind of the kind of breakdown of the underneath of the report. Something else that we published at a similar time, again, which actually came up yesterday on a briefing where the vendor actually cited it, which is always quite flattering for Alan, was a blog post that Alan wrote when he was in Silicon Valley about a month ago, called Agentic AI, Silicon Valley's Latest Love Affair and Growing Pains. So I think that's an appropriate thing to read as well. Is there anything you want to add on that one, Alan, before I just recommend that people just go read it?
No, it's really interesting. So just an insight into my life as an analyst, right? Every quarter I spend a week in Silicon Valley meeting with clients, and not actually just with clients, meeting with anybody who wants to meet, frankly, right? I base myself there for the week, and yes, of course, we meet with our clients, but you know what? I've got nothing else to do, so I'll grab a coffee or lunch or breakfast with anybody,
or go for a German walk,
or go for a walk. And that has become a thing, which is a very nice thing, actually. And but we had this, or we had multiple meetings, but there was themes sort of came out of it, and one was, I mean, we've talked about this so many times, but I mean, again, I experience this at least once a quarter because I'm actually out there more often than that. But at least once a quarter, the disconnect between Silicon Valley and the real world. It's spectacular. It really is. I mean, it's always been there, but if anything, it's getting worse. And the quote we have on the screen, if you're watching on YouTube, is that in the Bay Area, everybody assumes the whole world is using agentic AI, because all you see on the 101, which is the highway which runs from San Francisco down to San Jose, that's what the billboards are telling you. And it really is fascinating. I mean, I'm going to go off on a little bit of a tangent here. Another conversation which came up in two separate locations, sort of independently, was, about jobs. And people say, yeah, but I mean, AI is replacing these people at Microsoft and Salesforce and this, that, and the other. And I'm saying, no, it's not. No, it's not. That's just the latest excuse for the latest round of layoffs,
which may or may not be connected with the taxation change over R&D credits in the US system.
Yes, very much so, actually. So it's interesting. I mean, it's worrying, if we're being honest. I mean, you can make fun of these things, but this disconnect is not healthy. And yes, download Matt's report. Excuse me. But what I think you'll find when you read Matt's report is at the end of it, two reports, is at the end of it, hopefully you'll end up in a place where we are, which is, listen, agentic AI actually works. It's very clever. There's no problem with the technology. The problem is when you apply it to the real world, it comes up very, very short. And that concerns me. That concerns me. Anyway, that's maybe a topic for another day. And it just sounds like we're mocking Silicon Valley, and we're not. Mm-hmm. It is actually a serious problem. And unless you do spend time there, and I'm very fortunate that I'm able to, they're on another planet.
Well, I mean, I got an example before we go on to the last topic up on screen. Is just the for people watching, is the form on deepanalysis.net to fill out to get the report. It literally is name, company, email. Don't ask for a telephone number, which is good because no one likes getting telephone calls. But I was on a briefing yesterday afternoon, and we had that moment when, again, of course, we're all used to self-driving taxis now, thinking, well, you are, because you're based in San Francisco. Nobody else
Nobody else
has ever seen any of these things. So, again, it's a value solution to a value problem sometimes, and it seems to be very difficult for people in that geography to understand that there's very much a vacuum in which they exist.
Yeah, and for what it's worth, when I'm driving from the little cottage I stay in Pacifica, and I see a Waymo, I keep an extra bit of distance. And the thing is, I've noticed everybody else does too.
Yes.
Even in Silicon Valley, nobody trusts them.
You're worried about the unpredictability of what the Waymo.
Yeah, they're going to suddenly brake or decide to take a sudden turn left. Yeah.
So, talking of the real world, not the long since forgotten about MTV reality program, but actually some of the research that we've been writing or conducting in the last year. We published something, I published something last week about whether we actually had the underlying element of an AI adoption index. So over the last year, we've conducted now 4. 3 have been published, 1 is about to be published, MMI reports, so market momentum index reports, which are large-scale pieces of research that we build on a variety of different technology markets. But one thing we've done within these technology markets, because they exist in our niche, and our niche is our niche, we can ask some similar questions, almost identical questions, across all the surveys and build a kind of a time series sort of data maybe about it. And we thought, well, we would go and pick out the data points just from those 4 MMIs across the 12 months we've been running them to see whether we've got something which gives an indication about broad AI adoption. So up on screen for people right now, again, links, show notes, you know the drill. If you want to read this in some detail later on, we've got some rough time series data across these 4 MMIs across the last year, which is letting organizations identify themselves within a descriptive cohort of where that organization is on AI. We allow them to say if they're concerned or skeptical, motivated, experiment, operational, accelerated, or transformational, and we give detailed descriptions of what each of those terms mean, both in when we conduct the research, but also within the blog post, so you get a feeling. But the idea was to see across this sort of 12-month period across these 4 surveys, and I think it's around 1,800 respondents. It's actually quite a large scale piece of work when you would combine those across the 4. We've seen actually some relatively consistent performances across those data. Very little concerns and skeptical, quite a lot of operational and accelerated. So that was kind of interesting. But actually, Alan, you want to jump in there?
Well, yeah, Joe, one, I can't just help myself. Yeah, it's about 1,800, but these are fully vetted, expensive surveys. I mean, this is really solid data, and I'm not just saying that to wave our flag, but my God, there's so many surveys out there which are just rubbish, right? This is solid stuff, and in a sense, it's not surprising, right? So I just want to balance our skepticism, because I think I was overly skeptic and a bit snarky possibly about agentic AI, right? Listen, AI is real. People are adopting it. It is operational. It is in the business. Now, does that mean they're just using Copilot? Don't know, right? But AI is very, very real. It's very, very much happening. So I just want to counterbalance our skepticism with a bit of reality, right? This is actually happening. It's not all nonsense. Yeah.
You want to counterbalance the skepticism you cited about 3 minutes ago. It's really what you want to do, right? Yes. So up on screen for people who are watching it, and again, show notes, etc., is the breakdown of that previous histogram by survey. So the survey dates up here is the time the surveys were conducted, not when the research came out, because you're thinking, hey, the most recent one appears to be April 2025, but it's now July and the report's not out. It's because that's when the data collection was made, and it can take up to 3 months after the data is collected for the analysis, design, scheduling, release, PR, all that kind of stuff.
Yeah, particularly when one of the sponsors doesn't send in their logo details.
Stuff like that. Stuff like that. Operational stuff. So the data up here is when we conduct the research. So the first one was June 2024. The last one was April 2025. So let's call it a broad 12 months. What you will notice from the if you're able to see it, is actually relatively good consistency across the 4 surveys. Now, what's interesting here is not all the surveys were for the same cohort of people. Let's stop and go backwards. April 2025 was very much directed at IDP. That's the green one. November 2024, the yellow one was directed at supply chain. There's a big difference between supply chain and IDP. And IDP, as we discussed before, is very much the part of generative AI that is paying for itself right now. It might be the only part of generative AI which is paying for itself right now. So those people are going to be very AI savvy. Supply chain, as we can see on there, somewhat less. The August 24 and the June 24 were really directed at sort of unstructured data professionals. So very much our core audience, and you'll see a real consistency across those 2 surveys. So even when we looked at that previous one, which was an aggregation of all the 1800, what we're seeing on this one is actually within the aggregated data, there's some differences, some interesting differences. A good example, if you're watching this, is that if you were to average out Alan and I on a histogram, we would have a pretty much consistent amount of hair. If you look at us individually, we've got quite different amounts of hair. So this is the danger sometimes of over-aggregating data and smoothing it all out to come out with an average, because the average is great, but the average is often nobody within the data itself.
Yeah, very, very much so. And in fact, that's the theme of this month's newsletter, which should be arriving in your mailboxes next week, is just to be blunt about it. We are politics aside, which is really hard to put them aside. The tech world at the moment is full of misinformation.
Mm-hmm.
And so what we're trying to do here is be absolutely transparent. Yeah. And if we take our numbers and we just aggregate everything, whether that's revenues or stuff we get from surveys, yeah, you end up with a big number. It doesn't help anybody. It doesn't help anybody. So, with supply chain, well, we would expect supply chain to be a bit behind the curve. Who wouldn't expect that? That's sort of a given, right? What's really interesting, though, when you break down the numbers, and it is worth going to YouTube and looking at this chart, is that the motivation level in supply chain is off the freaking charts.
Mm-hmm.
So, yeah, it's not a story. There's more nuance here, is what I'm
well, I mean, it's deployment that's lagging, not intent.
Not intent. The intent is there, and a bit of it's not actually a humble brag at all. It's just a brag. Turns out that so I wrote an article for Supply Chain Exchange magazine based on that survey. We were told yesterday that it's the most read article in the edition. I mean, so there's so much going on, right? But it's going on in different ways in different places. And it's that level of granularity you need to actually make business decisions.
Right. And this is really important.
What we're trying to give people.
This is really important. What you're seeing on screen right now is about 8 to 10% of the last year's MMI data, right? Even in this area, or something that's on screen, we could break this down even further by sub-industry, by geography, and also into individual roles from respondents to find out, people in IT, how they're feeling, and lines of business, as an argument's sake. So there's an awful lot more granularity that's actually broken down within the MMIs, which, the links to them are in the blog post what I'm talking about right now, and we'll put that into the show notes. So you can go and download that, and in some cases, not the raw data, but a good chunk of the data as well, which is in the appendixes. So you can actually do your own analysis on this data, should you wish.
Yeah, it's really important as well, because so these were sponsored, which doesn't mean that the vendors told us what they wanted to get out of it. That's not how this works, right? These were, truly independent. But because they've been sponsored, it does mean that you can download they're about, how big are they? They're about 50 pages or something.
Yeah. Well, I know, because we know.
Yeah, by today's standards, they're huge. And you can download these for absolutely free. You can go to Hyperscience for the supply chain one. You can go to AIM for a couple of them. The new one that's coming out, that's with
Island for one of them.
Island, M-Files, whatever. They are free to download, and they are meaty. And again, I'm going to stress this. These are not surveys that say, oh, look, here's a big number. These are surveys which have granularity in them. And that's what you need if you are planning anything, whether you're an enterprise, whether you're a vendor, whether you're an investor. You need detail, because at the moment, all we're getting is just big, silly numbers.
Yeah. So there's a lot of really deployable data in here. As Alan said, sponsors do not commission surveys. We have a list of MMIs that we want to run in a given time, and people can come on as a sponsor to support them, really, because they're quite expensive to produce. And from supporting them, you get to distribute them, you get insight into the data, but we don't take a commission to say, I want a survey that does this or anything like that. We decide what is going to be interesting, and then we find sponsors who think it's similarly interesting and want to support us in doing that, which is kind of a little bit different to the way in which other places operate, probably to our financial detriment. Almost certainly to our financial detriment.
Yeah, no, they're not cheap, and the truth is there probably is way more money in producing big silly numbers, but we don't do that.
No, we don't. That's it. That's our 30 minutes. Well, a little bit more than 30 minutes, as we promised. We're always a little bit over time. Next time, there'll be 3 more topics and 30 minutes to discuss them in. Alan and I, by then, will both have had a little break and had a little holiday. So we'll come back refreshed and probably able to talk at 3 times the speed in 36 minutes as we did today. But again, thanks for coming in, Alan.
Thank you.
And thanks for joining us. And we'll see you in August. Bye-bye.
Bye.